Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another session of the program this evening with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Prof, thank you for being here again this evening.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to a very stimulating session as usual.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, let's get right into the program. Last week, we were still talking about the political situation in Israel and where things were going with that. But this week, we're seeing the continued escalation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prof, what's your view on what's going on there? What is the genesis of the problem?
Well, our viewers will know that I never like to start a narrative in the middle because it may give you a distorted view of what is responsible for what. But if we are to go to the beginning of the Arab Jewish conflict, believe me, we probably will go back to when uh, Moses crossed the river and took the Israelis into quote unquote the promised land. And if we do that, believe me, we will spend the rest of this century, and we still wouldn't have finished discussing uh, the complexities of the Arab-Israeli relationship. So let's just go straight to the point about the immediate cause of what's going on. And the immediate cause is this: against international law, against the ruling of several international institutions, Jews who are living in settlements had laid claim to Arab houses, Palestinian houses, which they claim some trust bought from Palestinians who were living there before Israel was even created. And the Palestinians went to court. Some had already been evicted. But the Israeli Supreme Court, knowing how volatile that case was, decided to have a 30-day moratorium before they will consider the case. But this did not prevent clashes between the Israeli settlers, who frankly came from abroad. They were not even in the Mediterranean. These people came from abroad for Israel itself. So you had that tension there, number one. Number two, the Alaska mosque. That one is a long history, has a long history, because the mosque was built on the site of, I believe, it's Solomon's temple. So Palestinians who are Muslim congregate on top and worship Allah, while the Jews still worship by the wall. That's all that is left of Solomon's temple. But people claim that under the mosque is still a large part of Solomon's temple. I don't know why the Israeli police became so so heavy-handed. I mean, they have uh, um, experience in dealing with demonstrations and counter demonstrations and what have you. But all the films that I saw showed heavy-handedness on the part of the Israeli police while trying to control Palestinians who just wanted to go and pray. And especially when they know that this is, the time of Ramadan, they could have been less heavy-handed and handled the situation with some finesse. I'll go back to the role of the police later. Then you had something that has been festering, but we people tend to forget that under Trump, Netanyahu moved the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a very explosive and contentious issue. So that again was simmering there. So and you now had, okay, a day was always set aside where nationalistic Jews will march through the whole of Jerusalem, crossing Palestinian areas and provoking them. So when you put all of this together, things just exploded. There is so much that you can package at any time. Things just exploded. Now, it's been suggested that the fact that Netanyahu having not won the last election was looking, frankly, for a crisis that to allow him to show himself as the strong man of the area. And that also Hamas in Gaza, there were internal dissension. There was this, unity agreement that they signed between Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians on the West Bank, so that both governments or both government authorities wanted some crisis that will allow them to flex their muscles and perhaps increase their visibility and their credibility. I don't want our listeners to also forget that the opposition to Netanyahu has been negotiating with the Arab Party in the Knesset. And if they got the support of the Arab Party, they will actually have a majority. And Netanyahu will be out to now face the criminal charges against him. Now the way this crisis has gone, there's no way the Arab Party, unfortunately, there's no way the Arab Party will now give its support to any Israeli government, which will be a disaster for Israel. So now you have all of this that is going on. About an hour ago, a spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel announced that Israel was not ready for a ceasefire. Now, that is very significant in terms of strengthening the point I made earlier on, that at least Netanyahu was exploiting the crisis for his own political survival. Now, the United States, it tries to be neutral, but this is funny. Anybody who is anybody knows that no United States government can afford to be neutral on the case involving Israel because of two reasons, two factors. One is the electoral power of American Jews and their financial power as well, which any party contesting for the presidency in the United States cannot afford to antagonize. Number two is the strategic factor. Both the United States and Israel exchange a lot of intelligence. In the Middle East, you cannot beat Israel when it comes to intelligence. There are so many, and I think I've said it on this program before, there are so many Jews living clandestinely in Arab countries, that they claim to be Arabs. And since there's been a mixture of all these populations, they have access, which they pass on to Mossad. And so, even though America pumps a lot of money and equipment into the armed forces of Israel, they still regard themselves as doing a favor by giving intelligence concerning Middle East to the Americans. So the United States cannot afford to be neutral. And that's why when I heard Biden say the usual template, Israel has the right to defend itself, not when there are rockets flying into Israel. He never said anything about the provocations. He never of the Palestinians. He never said, well, Jews should not be evicting, Palestinians from their homes. He never said anything about Israel not moving their capital to Jerusalem. He never said anything about the heavy-handedness of the police. He never said anything about what basically we look out for in a war situation. When I say we, I'm talking about scholars in international relations, is the proportionality of response. Yes, 1,000 rockets flew into Israel, 90% of which that dome that Israel has was able to intercept, while only about 10% got through. And so far, I think the 14 or so Israelis have been killed, while 80-something Palestinians, including about 15 children or so, have been killed. So is it proportional? The last thing I saw were tanks, Israeli tanks, firing shells into the Gaza Strip. By the time this is all over, I will expect when they've finished killing about maybe 200 Palestinians, then they will be ready for they'll be ready for a ceasefire. It's not proportional at all. It has never been proportional. And even the Secretary for Defense of the United States again came on air to say he has spoken to his counterpart in Israel, and the United States stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel. So, and when the Americans stand shoulder to shoulder with you, God help the person you are pounding. It stands no chance. So that is really why I said the immediate cause is what we should look for. And if you are going to resolve the matter and bring peace, not suspended peace, you've got to deal with this eviction of Palestinians from their homes, and you've got to deal with the relationship of the police. I mean, the intercity riots that are now taking place at Lord and a few other cities between Palestinians and Jews. The Israeli police are not even neutral. They don't intervene when Jews are beaten up and burning Palestinians and their vehicles, but they quickly intervene and arrest Palestinians when Palestinians are beating up Jews. So the law and order is not neutral. No, so they will have to speak to the police, and in a way, I am glad that in the past 3 4 hours, the language of Netanyahu has changed. I think he never expected that there will be inner city riots between Palestinians and Jews in Israel. And the brutality even has frightened him, that he has said, this is not acceptable. This is not us. We don't do this. But actually, it's not true. They do it all the time. It's an unequal contest.
Prof, I want to ask a question on this area of proportional response. Yes, the police could have been heavy-handed in their response, and we've seen riots in other places. But the response from the Palestinians of firing hundreds and hundreds of rockets into Israel, we could also argue that even that was not proportional. And if the Palestinian want the Israelis to stop, then they should stop firing the rockets.
Well, Egypt, that is, and Qatar, who are leading the Arab, what I would call the Arab peace team, had said that they got a positive response from the authorities in Gaza, whereas Israel said it wasn't prepared to talk, not now. So while you are right that ceasefire has to be mutual, and I will agree with you. I'll agree with you that what's happened internally in Israel, Hamas should have left it alone, even though one knows that things were boiling up already, as I pointed out to you. The movement of the capital to Jerusalem, and anything that happens at the Alaska mosque, tends to trigger off an emotional response from the Arab world. But I think Hamas should have left well alone and let them battle it out. I mean, I think the fact that the Israeli Palestinians, in other Palestinians who live in Israel, did not run away, faced with live bullets, faced with rubber bullets. They didn't run away, even after 8 days, showed that they were not cowards. And if Hamas had just left things alone, and I made mention of the fact that even the Supreme Court of Israel has shown a sensitivity in appreciating the risk factors in dealing with that case. Maybe they should have allowed things to take its course without intervention. You are right.
Prof, there's a question here on YouTube that I want to put across, which looks at the relationship between the United States and Israel. And the question here says the Democrats are in power and war is breaking out in the Middle East. Why do these wars spring up more often under the Democrats?
Well, the Democrats don't start the war. They don't. Um, um, presumably, the antagonists may feel that if you start violence and a war under the Republicans, uh, the Republicans are just going to flood Israel with weapons. I mean, we've seen under Trump, there was nothing Netanyahu could do wrong. He will back Netanyahu to a fault. Whereas when the Democrats get in, they, even though the Democrats are pro-Israel as well, but at least they try a liberal, the liberal tendency of walking in the middle of the road. And the protagonist may feel, well, we want the Americans to intervene. And the only way we can get American attention and perhaps get a little bit of sympathy from them is by starting violence, which would then, because the United States is not ready for intervention in the Middle East right now. It has China to deal with, it has Russia to deal with. The Iranian problem is there. It's still battling COVID-19, vaccine or no vaccine. So I would say that the Middle East was probably number 10 or 15 on the list of issues that Biden thought would come before him. Now, probably it's going to end up being number 3 after China and Russia. So, but don't I hope I haven't given the impression, but don't get the impression that Democrats start wars. I think it's simply because on one hand and on the other hand, which is the definition of liberalism, uh, allows the Democrats to see some of the points, even if they don't say so um, openly, to see some of the grievances of the Palestinians and privately tell the Israelis, you can't do this and not expect reaction from the Palestinians. Whereas under Trump, that would never have happened.
Mhm. Prof, there's a question here regarding Israel's capacity to actually deal with these large scale wars. No doubt you've talked about Israel's military intelligence, being top notch there. But one of the things that has been called to question in this particular conflict is the fact that some loopholes started to show in the capacity of the Iron Dome system to deal with the number of rockets that were coming in. Would you say that that's just a one off issue, or is this showing bigger holes in Israel's armor?
At the time, it was actually the Americans who developed this Iron Dome. At the time they gave it to Israel, actually the success rate was in the 60s, 60% or thereabouts. Give room for propaganda that the Israeli may be claiming a success rate for the dome that it doesn't have. I mean, after all, in war, propaganda to diminish your opponent's capacity to react to you and inflating your own rate of success. You are right that the dome cannot stop all the rockets. They can't. And we have seen the result of it. If I won't be surprised if in all the wars between Israel and the Palestinians, this will be the first time that the Palestinians in Gaza will will be will be scorning this kind of success that they are scorning. Because you see, it's like when America was fighting in Vietnam. Vietnam could afford to lose 100 soldiers, and it wouldn't shake the Vietnamese. It didn't shake the Vietnamese nation. Whereas 5 dead American soldiers would end up shaking America. It's the same thing between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Of course, every life matters, but in terms of cultural absorption of death, one Israeli soldier or Israeli citizen dying shakes Israel more than, say, 10 or 20 Palestinians dying in Gaza. So, to that extent, Israel itself cannot afford a long-term war. The soldiers in the Israeli Defense Force, some of them reserves pulled from their jobs, has considerable effect on the Israeli economy. Of course, America will increase its aid, even though America has problems of her own. So, I will say that it is in Israeli interest to get a ceasefire in place as soon as possible. However, this is an everlasting conflict. Why do I say so? Every year, the capability of the Palestinians increases. They develop better weapons, which they are not buying, they are developing them in Gaza. I mean, this is the first time that they'll be able to target Tel Aviv, target Jerusalem, target Beersheba in the south. So in a way, the arc of intervention ability by the Palestinians has increased considerably since the last time. And don't think Palestinians will go to sleep after the next ceasefire. they would then develop and develop and develop. And Israel has to then come to the conclusion that a permanent peace with the Palestinians that makes sure it avoids the provocations which I had identified earlier on will be avoided. It's only that way that Israel will be safe. But you know, but to think, okay, it will be tit for tat. You supposing the next time within one day, 3,000 rockets are fired across. Would all of them be intercepted? Yes, you could pound Gaza, but he that is down needs fear no fall.
Mm. Prof, do you see this conflict escalating in what we could see as a full-blown war between these two parties right now?
Well, I don't know what you mean by a full scale war. It is already a war. The only thing missing is Israeli soldiers in Gaza, boots of Israeli boots on the ground in Gaza. That's the only difference. That's the only what separates this from being called a full blown war.
Wow. Thank you for that, Prof. Let's move to something maybe somewhat lighter, and that is the issue of the Olympics, which is a few months away. And there are some calls that, given all that is going on in the world now, particularly around COVID, that the Olympics should be cancelled. What's your take on that, Prof?
I do sympathize with athletes who probably have spent the past 3 years or so training um, for the ultimate prize of winning gold at the Olympics. And I can understand their frustration. A few of them have spoken out in anger at even the suggestion that this thing should be postponed. But I can also, you see, when you look at what's happening in India, India is paying the price for ignoring the fact that we are still in a period of a pandemic. They thought they had conquered the pandemic, uh, and now see the consequences of it. People will be coming from all over the world. You cannot ban the athletes from coming in. You have banned the spectators from flying in, but you cannot stop the uh, uh, the athletes from coming in. Yes, you will ensure that each person has the certificate that either they have been inoculated or that they are COVID-19 free. But that's no foolproof. Now, do you want to then run the risk of COVID-19 breaking out in the games village where the athletes are going to be sequestered? It's a difficult decision to take. And as I said, I do sympathize with the athletes because for all the hard work, aching muscles, this is their chance of glory to say it's all been worth it. And to have it cancelled, some may be too old by the next Olympics. Hopefully, we will get over this year. Hopefully, because I mean, in Nigeria, they've just imposed now a partial lockdown. Um, Curfew has been imposed simply because they are scared not of what is happening in India spilling over into Nigeria. And every day, more nations ban flights, from Brazil, from Argentina, from India, and what have you. So we haven't conquered. We are not even anywhere near to conquering COVID-19. So my own reaction would be bite the bullet. Just cancel, don't set a new date. Cancel the Olympics. And when we have conquered this virus, then let the governing council meet and reschedule it. If Japan then doesn't want it, I'm sure that the other countries who will want it.
Prof, you touched very briefly on COVID and the African response to what's going on in India. Increasingly, we're starting to see, like you've highlighted there, that lockdown. Is that enough of a lockdown, or should African countries start to do a lot more to lock down their environment? There was a report recently that said the second wave in Africa was actually worse than the first wave. Should African countries be doing more now, given the example of what we've seen in India?
Well, you've raised a very significant question, which of course the answer is obvious. The answer is yes. They should. They should be pumping money into their science sectors. By now, I will expect that uh, they will have gone in for, recruitment of scientists from their universities, take them to centers where they could manufacture vaccines. Again, I don't mean to be nationalistic because there must be other countries in Africa, but we used to manufacture vaccines in Nigeria. Yellow fever vaccine, I'm aware of. A few of those that we used to and distribute in West Africa. Now, due to government lack of foresightedness, we've allowed those institutions to be run down. By now, I would have expected that money and material like this will now be pumped into this. I know there are some universities that are looking at cure for this using natural herbs. Afe Babalola University is one of them. Fine. I mean, if it works, because the logic there is that every medication has its roots, if you will pardon the pun, in natural herbs. And that therefore, when you go to the natural herbs to tease out the things that are needed. So that's the first one. The second one is I don't like, and I warned against it, Africa being made to play the role of victim. Each time people talk about uh, uh, big, about the superpowers playing politics with vaccine, not shipping vaccine to here to there, always in the third world and so on. And I say, you shift the blame to the superpowers. You don't admit for 1 minute that governments of third world had misplaced priorities. Take India. India spent a lot of money sending rockets to space. India has spent a lot of money on its armed forces. And yet, it hasn't spent sufficient money into the medical field to build oxygen manufacturing establishments, to build vaccines, and the consequence is what we have seen in India. So while we are blaming the superpowers playing nationalism, before we go to them with our beggar bowl, please give this to us, we should blame our own leaders for misplaced priorities. I mean, the United States is going to the moon, and Russia and China, at least they're also producing vaccine in massive quantities. I mean, Biden has just produced $1 trillion infrastructural bill, and it's used the term infrastructure in an expansive manner to include health facilities, social welfare facilities, and what have you. In addition, of course, to the first COVID palliative bill, which runs also into trillions. It's no use trying to compete with these people, because it is then false logic when you can easily fall through the net, the either infrastructural net or others, because you are pursuing an ego-driven something to be counted as among space countries, or that your army has submarines and what have you, when, as I said, you could easily fall through and there are several countries, not just India, there are several countries in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, that are on the tipping edge. I pray that COVID-19 3 will not, that the virus, the third virus, which has gone through so much mutation, will not come to Africa, because if it does, then we are in for it.
Wow. Um, Prof, in the sort of last 15 minutes this evening, let's look at Russia first, and then we end with the United States. Some weeks back, there was that whole hoo-ha about Russia military buildup around Ukraine, and things kind of died down a little bit, and we didn't hear, the world kind of moved on to other things. But we now have Ukraine still crying out and saying, "Hey, world, Russia still has about 100,000 troops on the border here." Prof, what should the right response be in this Russia-Ukraine issue that's going on?
But first of all, it was a strategic game that Russia played. Moved those troops there, got the attention of the world that I can strangle Ukraine anytime I want to. And let the Americans ask themselves, are we prepared to go to war with Russia for the sake of Ukraine? That has always been the classic debate among advisors, among scholars. Do we sacrifice New York because we want to save Poland? And there's no American president who is going to say, yes, I'm prepared to sacrifice New York. If the Russian wants to bomb New York because I've sent troops to try and save Poland, or save Ukraine, or save Latvia from the Russians. Now, no American president will ever take that kind of a decision. Russia knows it, and the Americans know it. Having achieved his purpose of drawing attention to that, he said it was all, normal military exercise, and that he's taking them back. But did he leave that border the way he met it? The answer is no. He left the weapons, the tanks, the this, the that. He left them behind. So next time, they don't even need to bring all the hardware along with them. They're already situated there. So I'm sorry that one has to say this. I would suggest very much to the Ukrainian leaders, do a deal with Putin. The United States is not going to bail you out. It can't, not given Putin's mood. People have, because there are so many crises all over the world. The speech on the state of the nation that Putin gave, not enough attention has been paid to it in the Western media. He basically said, if you threaten Russia, I will deal such a blow that you never expected and that you've never gone through. He said it plainly, blank. And if that is his mindset, then you've got an aggressor on your hand who's prepared to go any length to secure Russia, not militarily, but respect for Russia to be accepted as an equal by the United States. After the Soviet Union disintegrated and only Russia was left, Russia fell considerably in terms of gravitas. That was when we then started talking about a unipolar world, where America was the only superpower, and it's whatever it wants that goes. And that was humiliating for Russia. Now it's gone to that level where Putin feels he can challenge the United States again. And that's what has happened. So my advice to Ukraine is, don't be bellicose. Don't be bellicose towards Russia. I'm not saying Russia is right, by the way. I am just being a realist. Morality doesn't help you much in an international relations where power is the ultimate determinant. Go do a deal, be soft-spoken with Putin, and get on with your life, even if it means losing territory. Countries have lost territory. The United States is still occupying Guantanamo Bay, which belongs to Cuba, between India and Chinese, and there are still disputed border areas all this time, since even the war in the 60s, that are there. So,
Prof, there's a question to put to you here. That was the news that the U.S. Navy had seized a huge cache of arms that were Russian made. But then they gave not much details. Are we seeing Russia again starting to strategically position itself by moving arms around? Or what do we make of that situation there?
to tell you the truth, I am suspicious. It just sounds too neat. The American Navy seizes this ship, and you find those weapons on board, you take those weapons off, and load them onto the American Navy. You don't tell us the nationality of the skipper of the ship, the nationalities of members of the crew. You don't tell us. Where did they say they were going? Even if they told you that they're just sailing to get fresh air, tell us. That's what they said. You didn't tell us that. Ah, look, one needs to be careful about the games these people play. I'm sure in the armory of the CIA, you will find weapons made by anybody in the world. Just as in the Russian armory, you will find American weapons, whether they are manufactured by them or seized by them somehow. So if they then want to confuse you and divert your attention, they could put those weapons on board the ships. Russia has this huge Antonov planes that are usually used to deliver military cargo. So if this is really a serious enterprise, I wouldn't expect them to put it on board the ship that is, drifting here and there. They could also have bought those weapons from arms dealers. It could be some militia somewhere, whether in Africa or what have you. There was once Iran sent a ship full of weapons. They said the ship was going to Gambia. It ended up in a Nigerian port and it was seized. I don't know, somebody must have tipped off the Nigerian military authorities. And on board that ship were government officials of Iran. The case was then just buried. The Iranians sent a delegation and they were quietly released and allowed to go off. But those weapons were meant for the Shia militia in Nigeria. So who knows? This is a murky world. The world of weapons is a murky one. And one just needs, but I won't take at face value whatever any country says about some of them. I will ask questions to which they won't give you an answer.
Prof, let's round up with this news coming out today about 120 retired military officers in the United States um, are saying that the election was a fraud. Um, how do you respond to that news, Prof?
I'm not surprised. There is evidence that right-wing elements had actually penetrated the American military. Some of them were involved in the attack on the Capitol. So this is not just evidence, if you are looking for one, that the American military has been, that it's been successfully targeted. If you get retired generals at that level, on the day that the number 3 Republican leader, ex-leader in the House of Rep, was saying there is no evidence at all, and that's about time the Republican Party drops that big lie. Trump's Attorney General, before he resigned, said there is no evidence of a corrupted election. The head of the FBI said there is no evidence that they have found all cases taken to the courts had been thrown out for lack of evidence. So where did these generals, retired generals, then get their evidence? They are heating up the system. One has expressed fear about the effect on American society of Trump and his holding on to the Republican Party. And I think we've just seen evidence of this because these generals are not lunatics. They rose to become generals in the American army. So grant them that they're intelligent people, rational people, and yet they are following Trump against any evidence. I don't know what generals are up to these days because in France, we've had the same thing where, outgoing generals are also signing petitions publicly and warning that there could be civil war in France. So are we now going to say there could be civil war in the United States in spite of the fact that we thought we had put all of this behind us? These are not good times, frankly, for a lot of countries in the world. Not good times.
Prof, one last question I want to put to you before we go. And this is a question from YouTube here. And this is someone taking us back to the point around India to say, what are your views? Is India getting enough support from her allies?
Who are her allies? You tell me. All right. You will say that's for me to answer. Yes, the EU, Russia, the United States have been flying in materials, things that will be used in making oxygen, in setting up oxygen making plants. America, has waived the ban on exporting material that will be used in making vaccines to India. Russia has sent in. Well, at the back of my head, I can see pictures of plane loads on plane loads coming in. So, and the United States, of course, has said it will not oppose removing the
Intellectual property?
yes, the intellectual property in the manufacture of vaccines. People have said thank you very much, but that's not going on to all the vaccines, especially the Oxford vaccine that you have put in to cold storage, but you are not going to use, ship them out as well. So while we are battling with intellectual property of the vaccines, at least we will have immediate vaccines to use. But as I said earlier on, given the fact that India is culpable itself and there is no evidence that they've learned their lesson, no evidence at all. Just like in Africa, there's no evidence that African governments that have the capability to produce vaccines has learned its lesson. Instead, is where we are waiting for them to ship vaccines to us so we can continue to use. Nothing about we've transferred, $1 million to that vaccine making center that was there that we are allowed to run down. Nothing. Nothing.
Prof, thank you so much. We've run out of time this evening, but thank you so much to you. Thank you to our viewers for being here this evening. Any last words, Prof, before we go?
Peace.
Thank you, sir. Bye to our viewers. See you again same time next week.